Oh, hello. Welcome to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the new edition of the Horus Heresy, which Games Workshop's done a mighty preview for in the last couple of days. We're going to go through all the things that are revealed, and I'm going to give you my take on it all. So, it's first and foremost a big box of new models. So there's a massive new launch box on the way for the new edition of the Horus Heresy. This has all the things that you would basically expect from a Games Workshop launch box: hardback rulebook, reference sheets, templates, tokens of cards, decals, and 50 models of differing sizes. The best thing about the Horus Heresy when it comes to these kind of starter launch boxes is because the Horus Heresy is the story of a civil war, right? You don't have the usual problem that you have in 40k, where you get your box and it's like half awesome Space Marines and half something you don't care about, like Tyranids. And then you're like, what do I do with this Tyranid army that I don't want? Oh, let's say that year you really did want the Tyranids, and you're like, great Tyranids. And the next year it's Space Marines and Necrons. Like, you always end up with two really different forces. For the Horus Heresy, you can just buy the box and you can just paint them all the same color and away you go, right? So that's really good as a product. It's a really good, it's, because of the setting being a civil war, which I realize it has trade-offs. Some people don't like the Horus Heresy precisely because it's Marines versus Marines, but it does mean that this is going to be a great way to get into the hobby if you like the particular aesthetics of the miniatures in this box. So you're getting new plastic Mark II Space Marines. You get 40 of these. Now, I should explain for people who don't play Horus Heresy, there aren't, or at least in all the previous editions, there haven't been different rules for Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, Mark V, Mark VI Space Marine armor. It's an aesthetic choice, okay? And some legions really make sense in certain armor types and not in others. And one of the big uproars when the last edition of Horus Heresy launched and they chose to go with Mark VI as their flagship armor mark is that Mark VI is really commonly associated only with a couple of very niche chapters, so like the Raven Guard and maybe the Alpha Legion, and that's about it, right? Whereas Mark II is a more iconic mark of armor, right? So you're thinking about the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, the Iron Warriors, any legion, like generally speaking, the Loyalist legions, especially the ones that were wiped out on Istvan, which is where this particular box is set, but also any legion like the Iron Warriors, who they're not Loyalists, but they are, their lore is like, yeah, the War Master made the better stuff available to them, but because of their kind of space autism, they decided to keep the old stuff that they were used to because that fitted with the way they wanted to do battle, right? Um, Interestingly, it notes that you have a choice of bolters or disintegrator weapons, so maybe this is going to be the beginning of the end of that sentiment that I just expressed, and maybe, Mark II Marines are going to have these disintegrator weapon options, and maximum worry, they're just going to be better than bolters, right? They're going to be more efficient, better, cooler, and everyone's going to want to buy these for their tactical squads and throw their old tactical squads in the bin because Games Workshop likes money. Like, we don't know that's true, but I just think it's notable that they've come with a new weapon option for the basic legionary squad that isn't the bolter. They also come with banners and bits of sergeants and banners and comms and things like that, which is cool. Lore-wise, Mark II is like the oldest pattern of Space Marine armor. I know that sounds like a weird sentence if you're not very familiar with the lore, but Mark I armor was actually for the Thunder Warriors, who aren't Space Marines. So even though it's Mark II power armor is basically the oldest. These are the OG Space Marines in terms of the look. I realize in terms of the actual time, Mark VI are the OG Space Marines, but in terms of the lore, these are the OG Space Marines, okay? Interestingly, for anyone playing along at home, we now have Mark II, Mark III, and 6 in the new scale in plastic. Previously, for the 2 editions ago of Horus Heresy, they did plastic Mark IV and Mark III. The original plastic Mark III has now been replaced by the new plastic Mark III, but there's still plastic Mark IV in the old scale, right? This sort of pre-Primaris Marine scale. I know these aren't Primaris Marines, but when Primaris Marines came out, all of the Space Marines were slowly and surely scaled up to match their stature, right? Now, for me, I play Emperor's Children. In the lore and just aesthetically, Emperor's Children should, in the main, be in Mark IV armor, right? Especially if you're doing, as I am, the majority of the Emperor's Children that sided with with Horus. If you're doing like a Saul Tarvitz, like the few loyalist Emperor's Children, then it would totally make sense to have them in Mark II, because that's what they would have had, because the older, clunkier armor was kind of shifted towards the people they knew that they were going to be virus bombing. Spoilers, maybe, for the Horus Heresy, but it's been out for like at least a decade at this point, so if not 15 years. So yeah. Mark II is Mrs. TI's favourite armor mark, but she also doesn't want to buy this box, and I'm like, why? And she's like, well, I've got so many of the resin guys in the smaller scale. I don't want to like have these alongside them or replace them, because one of the problems that the Horus Heresy has is because the Horus Heresy is this game, this sort of legacy game that's been going on for a very long time, like I say, over a decade and a half now, at least, surely. I'm rubbish with numbers. Someone's going to be like, actually, Phil, it's been 20 years somehow, and that wouldn't surprise me. Typical millennial, no concept of the passage of time. But I will say, a lot of the specialist troops, right? So if you play Salamanders or Emperor's Children or Sons of Horus or Iron Warriors, any of the legions, right? They all have specialist troops that are just for their legion, which are some of the coolest things in 30k. And those models at the moment, all of them pretty much. Trying to think of a single exception. I think maybe some of the Sons of Horus stuff that came out last edition, perhaps. But like in general, that's all resin. And that's all, crucially, I'm not just being like, oh, plastic's better than resin. I mean, it is, but it doesn't faze me. But it is all crucially in the older scale. So if you really got into Salamanders, for example, and you were like, I want to get these plastic Mark II Marines to be the core of my Salamanders army, that's cool. And then you buy some Fire Drakes, and you'll notice that they're a bit smaller than your main troops. May not bother you, doesn't bother everybody, but it will bother Mrs. TI. So I think these are really cool. I'm really glad they exist. I'm just a bit of a... We're both just kind of set in our ways now with our older models, I guess. There's also a Centurion in Mark II armor, so I think this guy looks really, really cool. I think if you are wanting to start Horus Heresy and you're wanting to start with one of the chapters like Salamanders, Iron Warriors, Iron Hands, that really looks great in Mark II. This is a really great character to lead a pile of Mark II. Like, he looks really, really good. He isn't for me. I don't need him. He'd look weird in my army, which is all very clean lines, sleek lines, very Emperor's Children, very live, very fast. A lot of the sort of the Mark IV, the Maximus armor, very clean stuff, right? But yeah, I think it's a really cool model. I really do. And I think this is a much nicer... The Mark II stuff is much better for my taste. I quite like the look of all the Mark II stuff more than I like the look of the Mark VI stuff from the last big plastic release. But for me, neither of them sort of pass muster in terms of buying it. But you know, here we are. And then the Arachne Quad Accelerator platform. This I don't like. This is actually something that I dislike. So everything else, I mean, like, oh, this is really cool. It's not for me, but it's really, really cool. This is just the quad cannon from the Aegis defense line, but bigger. And I don't have positive associations with the quad cannon from Planet Strike, right? Because I remember when I was really into 40k, there was a period in 40k where my sisters of battle who had no access to any kind of anti-air anything would resolutely spend the 100 points or whatever it was on some Aegis defense line with a quad cannon, and you'd end up having to sit a squad with heavy bolters, and the sergeant would stand next to this quad cannon, firing the quad cannon, so that you didn't just get completely annihilated by flyers, because it was during that period of the game when they wanted to sell those flyers, and so the flyers were really, really powerful. And not everyone had their own answer to flyers. So because of that negative association, and just because it generally looks like a pretty uninspired model, yeah, I don't rate this as an inclusion. I mean, listen, ultimately, why did they manage to sell me, somebody who doesn't really like the new Horus Heresy infantry at the new scale. Why did I buy the previous starter box? Plastic Dreadnought, plastic, was there a plastic Leviathan in there? Or did I dream that? But there was certainly a plastic Spartan. I think it was a plastic Spartan and a plastic Contemptor, wasn't it? And seeing those stuff, that old resin vehicles brought into plastic in 1-to-1, because the vehicles haven't scale crept, that was what made me really, really happy to see plastic Horus Heresy. This is just taking the space of what could have been a cool plastic tank, right? And it's not cool. It's a weird little turret. Saturnine Terminators. So these Terminators with the massive shoulders, you get 6 in the box with a variety of weapons. These are a throwback to the days of Rogue Trader, right? And they're a remastering of some of the very first models for Warhammer 40,000, right? Now, this stuff is before my time. I am a child of 2nd edition. That was the edition of 40k that came out when that was in Games Workshop when I first walked in, right? 2nd edition 40k. I'm 38 years old. That's just the way it is. So I don't have the nostalgia for these. I don't really understand. I know that they've put in a lore flub for it. I don't really understand why these have Aquilas on the front in the Horus Heresy. It kind of, because you've got to remember, these are in a weird place in the canon. They existed as some of the older models in Rogue Trader, but they were never really in the lore for the Horus Heresy as we know it. And now they've kind of weirdly been retconned back in. If you are a hobbyist of a slightly earlier vintage than I, then I can totally understand how you're looking at these and going, wow, really, this is really, really awesome. Because the models are quite nice. If you, like, technically, they're really nice models, right? There's nothing wrong with them. And the designs are weird and derpy. But if those are the designs from your childhood, then I totally get it, right? I totally get it. If you're, the person this is aimed for, right? They're in their late 40s or pushing into their 50s, right? They're just a clear decade older than I am. And I guess for those people, they must be looking at these and grinning from ear to ear. And I'm just sat here going, well, we've already got 3 other kinds of Terminator to choose from, and I think they're all more awesome than these, personally. And then you got the Praetor in Saturnine Terminator armor, and it's exactly the same deal, isn't it? If you like the Saturnine Terminators, you're going to like this guy. I'm not so fond of them, so I'm not so fond of this guy. That said, I really do want to shout out this miniature in particular, like this one painted this way, because the paint job on this model is immense. Like, look at the freehand scroll on the shoulder. That's like some like Golden Demon bullshit there, right? This is and look at the marble and the energy on the giant hammer as well. Like, this is not an achievable paint job. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think it should. I know there are other companies out there that deliberately and for a while, it seemed like Games Workshop were doing this, and they've stopped now. Like, for a while, Games Workshop was deliberately dumbing down their paint jobs to make them look like really, really good, but still seem basically achievable. This is not an achievable paint job, but this miniature looks fantastic. I just have I've been in the hobby long enough to look at it and go, the things that are making this look fantastic are the fact that somebody has poured their own time, talent, and expertise into the miniature, and not really because it's a splendid, splendid sculpt, right? I know that I was to buy this model and paint it, it would not look like this, okay? And it would not spark the same joy. And more than any other, like, box regular shot of a Games Workshop model I've seen in a long time, this almost seems to have the biggest gulf between what is shown and what is achievable by the median hobbyist. And you could say that was a bad thing. I've sat and looked at this picture for a little while. I've really enjoyed it as a piece of art. I think the person whose job it was to sit and paint this might have the best job in the world. But this paint job is I mean, it's that NMN as well. And the NMN is so good that I'm looking at it and only now kind of clocking that it's NMN, but it is. It's just really, right? yours will not look this nice unless you are this guy, or another golden demon type level of painter, right? But really fantastic paint job, but I don't think it's the best model if you can, in your brain, like, layer on a more sort of high tabletop average paint job, right? Whether the kit has many weapon options, I didn't go through the site and show every single different option. I've been a little bit lazy today, just showing the headline pictures. But if you want all the other pictures, they are all on Warcom, okay? Then we got the Saturnine Dreadnought. Now, I deliberately picked this picture because I think the Saturnine Dreadnought looks much, much cooler in this picture, in this color scheme, because they have done one in the same Salamander's color scheme as these guys, right? Where the shoulders are very much a feature part, and they've got all that freehand fire on. But I think actually putting it in a color scheme where the shoulders more blend into the rest of the, I mean, they're still obviously there and they're huge, but the shoulders kind of more blend into the rest of the body. Like, for me, this is my pick of the models in the box. It's the best model in the box, in my opinion. I think this is a really, really cool looking Dreadnought. Apparently, it's even bigger than the Leviathan Dreadnought. I think it's really, really cool. I think it's cooler than the Redemptor. It's cooler than the a Castaferum Dreadnought, which some people are still fans of the Castaferum. The one with the head's okay. The one with just the slab fridge front is just funny now to me. But what it isn't cooler than is a Leviathan and a Contemptor. The thing with Horus Heresy is, I think I'm going to get a hate comment from Castaferum supporters. But anyway, it's really, really good. But is it better than the Dreadnoughts we already have? And there's already a large array of different Dreadnoughts available. Like, I think the Leviathan and the Contemptor are still cooler than this. Probably this beats out the Deredeo. Probably it definitely beats out the Castaferum. It definitely beats out the Primaris Dreadnought, whatever it's called. Yeah, cool. And then we got some rules changes. So there are more models, but I put the models at the end because now we've gone through all the models that are in the box, right? So they've hinted a little bit about the rules. So they're usually more complex, or you could say thematic if you're being charitable, but there are rules for challenges. So it's become more interesting as like a mini game for doing those one-on-one duels, which, to be totally fair, is it's one of the things that Horus Heresy is known for. Like, more than 40k, there are a lot of duels in the Horus Heresy, duels between Primarchs, duels between captains, and it's. I always feel like 30k, obviously, there is definitely mass battles in 30k. It's the setting for Warhammer. But I always feel like a 30k skirmish game would be a great thing. And I don't just mean like a reskin of Kill Team, because Kill Team isn't actually the best system for if what you want is like, well, there's Abaddon and Loken and Saul Tarvitz and they're gonna fight, right? Like a big hero. Like, I just think like a very hero-y skirmishy duel game is something that would really work in 30k, because while there are the massive engagements like the Dropside Massacre, there's also plenty of stories where it's like 5 guys on a ship or 5 guys in a tunnel, and they've all got names and they're all ridiculous badasses. So trying to have really good challenge rules inside the mass battle game, trying to find a way to do the kind of kung fu movie thing where the battle's going on around you, but everybody understands that these two people are going to have their duel just on the middle of the battlefield. I think that's cool. I think that's a useful and worthwhile genre trope to import and to solidify as something that Horus Heresy should have. I think that's positive. They've said some slightly worrying things about army building being liberalized and how you're no longer being forced to take basic troops. I think one of the worst thing about 40k at the moment is that army building has been liberalized. And I go backwards and forwards on this because I have, in my youth, in days gone by, been someone that's been like, oh yeah, I want to do a tank company. And if somebody wants to do a tank company or you know, something like that, they should be allowed to. But I think the system that they used to have for 30k, where you took your hero and then you could take a right of war, and some of the rights of war you could take could unlock SKU lists, but they were very specific SKU lists. Like, I have no problem with someone having a list that's like, yeah, I'm going to take all predators because predators are cool, because predators also aren't very good, right? So if that's your thing, you want to have all your Iron Warriors predator tanks, that's cool. But when when the list building's really liberalized, it just means that it's far easier for people to go, oh, I've worked out what the best thing is, and I'm just going to take a load of them. So we'll see. We will see. They have said there are some bonuses for taking balanced forces, you know, basic line infantry, things like that, which the proof of the pudding will be in the eating on that one. Like the bonuses, it's a very hard line. You know, if they're not good enough and they're just ignorable, then nobody's going to take Bolterman. And if they're too good, then everyone's going to have to take Bolterman, and you haven't really liberalized army building, have you? Now, this next bit was funny to me because I've been playing a lot of Star Wars Shatterpoint recently, which is obviously has 4 conditions, right? You have your pinned, your strain, your expose, and your disarm. And it just so happens the new version of 30k has 4 conditions: pinned, suppressed, stunned, and routed. Which, okay, look, I'm not saying that they ripped off Star Wars Shatterpoint, and even if they were inspired by that one mechanic, that's fine. It's allowed. Artists steal. I've got no complaints. I just think it's funny that there's 4 of them, and one's called pinned, and one has an exclamation mark as its symbol. But yeah, it's cool. I think applying that kind of idea of having like 4 basic debuffs and various weapons that you can put on one of these 4 debuffs, and it stops you having to have an array of special rules, because one of the hugest problems that 30k and games built off that system tended to have was that everything had its own special rule, or had, well, what was technically a universal special rule, but the universal special rule was on like 4 things, and there were like 40 universal special rules. So having like 4 conditions that people can learn and say, look, this weapon does suppressed, this weapon does stunned, this weapon does pinned, I think is really cool, if that's how it's going to work. I think that worked really well. Another fun thing they've done is they've added back in the other mental stats that were in Rogue Trader, which I don't like because they're nostalgic for them, but I like them because they make sense. So we have leadership, cool, willpower, and intelligence. I'm slightly disappointed because I used to play Inquisitor back in the day, that it's got intelligence and not sagacity, because sagacity was the best name for a stat in the entire world. Bring back sagacity, right? But leadership, willpower, intelligence, I think, make lots of sense. Previously, you had things like a psyker who needed to be really good at psychic powers, so would have a high leadership, which would then make him a really good leader of men, which he shouldn't be because nobody wants to follow the psyker into battle. Similarly, you know, you've got your sort of battlefield nerds, you've got some kind of tech marine who'll be really good at fixing tanks, needs to do some kind of role, shouldn't then necessarily be a fantastic leader of men, but now you've got an intelligence stat, right? Not quite sure what cool is going to be used for. That one seems slightly similar to leadership in terms of keeping or losing your cool check, but willpower and intelligence definitely make sense for me, and I can see things in the game that they would be for. Yeah. Also, they know that the weapons will have a damage stat like in 40k. This is probably a good thing because it means that you can have weapons that are better at shooting tanks and better at shooting infantry, and they feel important and different in that way, right? And it just stops one thing just being better than another and means that you can have more side grades. Books, all your old books are updates from the bin. Sorry, it is a hard new edition, not a soft new edition, which is slightly alarming, considering 3 years ago it was a hard new edition. Horus Heresy is the only game I can think. Well, okay. Kill Team did a full new edition, didn't it? Right, but they released all the rules for teams for free. You know, 40k as of yet has never had 2 editions in a row that have been hard resets. The granted 8th and 9th, that was only a 2-year span, right? It doesn't look like we're ever again going to get the sort of 2nd into 3rd into 4th into 5th into 6th into 7th edition thing where the game is fundamentally the same engine underneath and your codexes can roll over from one edition to the next for that long. But it would be nice if maybe your army books didn't need replacing after 3 years. Maybe you got 6 years out of them. They're big and heavy, and it feels like when you buy them, that I mean, this is what Games Workshop does. One of the whole corporate mantras that they have is a premium product for a premium price. So therefore, when you buy a Warhammer rulebook, it is more finely crafted than it needs to be for something with a 3-year shelf life, right? They are made. I mean, they're really well made. This has always been Games Workshop's thing. They make things in a really high-end, luxurious manner to help them justify the price. But my point is more, you don't need the rule books to be as nice as they are if they only have to last 3 years. They could be, bound like school textbooks, and that will be fine. They're perfect bound with softback covers. If you're going to replace them every 3 years, that's fine, right? They're constructed like something that you're going to keep and treasure for a lifetime, but they're not useful for that long, which I think is a weird choice. So if you want to play the Horus Heresy, you're going to need the core rulebook, and then you're going to need your codex, essentially your Liber book. So Liber Astartes for the Loyalist legions, Liber Hereticus for the Traitor legions, Liber Questoris for the Imperial Knights, Liber Exilia for the Solar Exilia, Liber Mechanicum for the Adeptus Mechanicum. They've said that Talons of the Emperor are getting a free PDF and then a full book later. I think because they want to release some new stuff for Talons, maybe for 40k, maybe for 30k, and they want to tie them all together. Remember, Knights and Talons are the 2 ranges in Games Workshop design that have hitherto anyway been allowed to have a release that works in both games. I think, as far as we know, that's going to continue. Yeah. One other thing is they also said that the new army building would make it easy to have allies. So you start going, well, I play Space Marines, but I'd like an Imperial Knight because why not? So now do I need to pick up the entire Liber Questoris? If you want to do that, signs point to yes. Your mileage may vary. They're also doing these things called they're called Journal Tacticas. And they've said quite woolly words in the preview article that they're going to feature historic details and new rules on recreating iconic engagements. Are these just going to be narrative scenarios and campaign systems? Are they actually going to have new units in? Are they going to be a must-buy for like standard competitive play, or are they just going to be a thing that you can ignore? Like are they going to be like a 40k Crusade book where you only need to buy it if you're interested in playing that particular kind of link campaign, or are they going to be like Heresy books have been up until this point where you have to buy them all because each one comes with like 4 or 5 new units? I also, if I play much of this edition of Horus Heresy, likely that most of it is going to be using the Zone Mortalis rules. I'd love to know if and where they are in these books. That I could see them showing up in one of these Journal Tactica books, but hopefully they are a core part of the core rules. That's what I would like to see. They also previewed a plastic Fellblade. Now, look, this is what I'm here for. And I appreciate they're running out of stuff, but whenever they just go, oh yeah, here's a thing that we had for the Horus Heresy that was in resin and that would be a tentpole purchase for the year in terms of your hobby expenditure, and now it's less than half the price and in plastic. Like, yes, cool. Might buy a plastic Fellblade just because Fellblades are kind of cool. I have a resin Falcon unpainted. I don't need a Fellblade, but Fellblades are cool, so I could see buying one at some point on a whim. If I wanted a second unfeasibly large tank, I probably don't, because I can already hear Mrs. TI now saying, you know, the baleful phrase of all hobby wives, that looks awesome, where are you going to store it? I never have an answer, okay? But it is a really nice, it is a really nice looking miniature for sure. Just bring out the rapier and the tarantula, and I'm just learning that I don't like turrety things. These existed in resin back in the day, and now they're in plastic. The tarantula is the static one at the top there with different weapons that it can have. Whippy. The rapier is a bit more interesting. It's on tiny caterpillar treads, and it's got like a little squad of marines and looking after it. And they're fun. If you play Imperial Fists or Iron Warriors or something like that, it's fun. It's not my jam, and you can tell that by the Legion that I play, which is Emperor's Children. But if you like that kind of siege warfare type aesthetic, then you might be really, really pleased that these, especially the tarantulas, I think look kind of cool. Yeah. Assault Marines and Breaches. I can't quite believe that they went through 3 years of Horus Heresy without full plastic Assault Marines or Breaches, but here they are. No real details here. This is where they're starting to get a bit vaguer. I'm wondering if these are going to be upgrade kits so that you can make like Mark 3, Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 6, like breaches. Don't know. We'll see. That's it. That's the whole video. Are you, like, in my audience, are you excited for the next edition of 30k? I am, like, lukewarm on it. None of the plastic excites me, except maybe the Fellblade, but even that, I don't need it, so I'm probably not going to buy it. Like, I'm almost certainly not going to buy it, right? I'm a bit, and Mrs. TI is the same. With Heresy, we've gotten very kind of set in our ways. I want to use stuff I already have. I'm not like that with other games. I'm happily, cheerfully replacing my skeletons for Age of Sigmar. But for some reason, I just prefer the OG resin marines and stuff. I don't know. A bit of a grog when it comes to that sort of stuff. So what I will do is I will undoubtedly pick up the core books, the new one, and the army books, and have a go, especially if it transpires that the Zone Mortalis format is included. But as for right now, I'm not after any of the new plastic miniatures. There are plastic things I would buy for the Horus Heresy, largely like one-to-one recreations of old resin vehicles. None of this new stuff really tickles the proverbial pickle. Thanks for listening. Do subscribe, comment, like, etc., and consider joining the Discord. Big thank you to all my members. Support me financially every single month. But an extra special thank you to Sam Troth, who is subscribed at the highest tier. All right, and I'll see you again on Monday with a video about something else. All right, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye.